One of my favorite turfs is the one that's here underneath me. This is St. Augustine grass. Where I live, we're just a little too far north to grow this grass. But let's go over some of the pros and cons of this grass here in the Clearwater area. You see Clearwater Bay behind me here. It does fantastic. This is just a great turf. I want to go over how to water, how to put down fertilizers, anything you need to know about this grass, how to mow it at what height, how to winterize it. Hi, I'm Dr. Tom Warren, and you're watching The Plant Doctor. Let's get started. So the range of St. Augustine grass that you can grow in the United States is mainly contained to the extreme southeastern United States. If you were to draw a line, Columbia, South Carolina, over towards Atlanta, Georgia, Birmingham, Alabama, over towards Jackson, Mississippi, and west into East Texas, that is pretty much the northern line where you can successfully grow St. Augustine grass. I have seen some yards where people have grown St. Augustine further north than that. I've seen it grown in Gadsden, Alabama, for example, which is further north than Birmingham. However, when we have a hard winter, that grass does come back extremely slowly, and in some areas don't come back at all. With most of our southern turfs, Bermuda and zoysia in particular, you can mow that 1.5 inches to maybe 2 to 2.5 inches tall. St. Augustine, you want to mow it a little bit taller. So you're going to mow St. Augustine grass up in that 3 to 3.5 inch range. And the reason being is the thick stolons that it has. So a stolon, think of a stolon as a long runner or a long tube. And off of that, you have roots that go down, and then you have grass blades that go up. And those stolons on St. Augustine are very thick. You do not want your mower blade getting down into those stolons and scalping off the top of the stolons, because that's the main feeder for your plants. That's what's producing the roots. That's what's producing the grass blades. So if you want a nice thick St. Augustine lawn, mow it at 3 to 3.5 inches. In terms of a chemical program for St. Augustine grass, my recommendation is this. Let's start in January and move through the calendar year. So in January, we're not doing much of anything. In February, as the soil temperatures approach 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're in Florida, you may not even get below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you're a little further north in the range, you will. As those temperatures reach 50 degrees Fahrenheit, put down a pre-emergent on your turf. I would recommend prodiamine. Prodiamine works really well on St. Augustine grass. Then as we progress further into the season, as we get into spring and we get up into the green up period, so April into May in most areas, if you're further south like here in Tampa, the grass may never go dormant really. So in those areas further south, you're going to put out your fertilizers a little bit earlier. You're going to put those out in maybe March. So depending on where you're at, in South Florida, you're going to put them out in March. The further north you go, you're going to put them out more towards April and May as the turf comes out of dormancy. I would recommend putting down 1.5 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet on St. Augustine grass on that initial application, and then come back 90 days later and put 1.5 pounds of nitrogen down again. St. Augustine grass loves the nitrogen. Its growth habit is such it doesn't grow so much up as it does out. It throws those stolons out that we talked about earlier. And in order to do that, it needs a lot of energy. It needs a lot of nitrogen to do that. As we progress into fall, my recommendation would be use another pre-emergent in the October time frame. I would use atrazine. So atrazine has pre and post-emergent properties to get rid of things such as poana grass. Poana grass isn't much of a concern the further south that you go in the range. The further north you are in the range, it is a concern. And so put atrazine out as the soil temperatures get below 70 degrees. You can take a meat thermometer and stick it in the ground and get a soil temperature. Or if you just Google soil temperature map, there's soil temperature stations all over, and you can just click one close to your area, and that'll give you a rough idea of what the soil temperature is in your area. Use that as a guide as to when to put out your pre-emergent. The watering requirements for St. Augustine grass are very similar to those of Bermuda and zoysia. My recommendation would be to put 1 inch of water per week during the growing season on your turf. An easy way to measure how much water you're putting out with your irrigation system, you can take a small saucer, put it out in the grass, and as you're watering and the irrigation is going back and forth across the yard, it's collecting water in that saucer. Take a ruler, stick it down in the saucer, and see how much water you put out. You can do one watering of 1 inch, or what I would prefer to see you do is this: do 2 waterings of roughly a 1/2 inch per week, and you'll get a little bit better results. You don't want to water this every single day at like a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch. The reason being is you don't want this grass to stay constantly wet, because one of the downfalls of having St. Augustine is it is susceptible to getting some funguses, in particular what we call rhizoctonia, commonly known as brown spot. So if you have well-drained sandy soils, this really isn't much of an issue as long as you're not watering every single day. If you have heavy clay soils and it holds a lot of water, even if you're just watering once or twice a day, you still may get rhizoctonia. You can handle rhizoctonia fairly easily. 2 chemicals you can use to control rhizoctonia is copper sulfate and daconil. I'll leave a link down in the description below for both of those products. Oftentimes we get those on other southern turfs as well, especially coming out of dormancy. Bermuda grass, zoysia grass, they can get those as well, but it's not as prolific as what we see with St. Augustine. In general, the more sun that St. Augustine gets, the better it will perform for you in your yard. However, it does take shade better than most other turfs that we have in the southeastern United States. It definitely can take more shade than Bermuda can take. It can take more shade than zoysia can take. This turf can take legitimate part sun. So we define part sun as 4 to 8 hours of direct sunlight per day. 8 or more hours per day is full sun, 4 hours or less is full shade. I've seen this grown in full shade, but it tends to get a little leggy and thin. It's not going to be this thick, lush mat like you see here below my feet. So the more sun it gets, the better. It will still be a thick, lush mat in those part sun situations, that 4 to 8 hour window. It gets less than 4 hours of sun per day, then it'll start to thin out. So not only do we need to mow this grass at 2 inches minimal height, I would prefer to see you mow it more in that 3-inch range. You need to mow this grass a minimal of once a week during the active growing season. This grass does grow fairly quickly. It'll get tall in a hurry. You'll also need to edge this a little bit more than you would say a zoysia grass or a Bermuda grass, because it has those runners. Those runners will go across driveways, they'll go into flower beds, and so you're going to need to edge it a little more often than maybe you would say a Bermuda or a zoysia grass. So that could be a positive or a negative, right? So the positive is that if you have a bare spot in your yard, St. Augustine will take over that bare spot very fast because it's throwing those stolons out and they're just looking for bare spots to move to. The downside is if that stolon ends up in your flower bed, it ends up over the side of the driveway, then we have to edge it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that regard, but this is still a really great turf. If you have St. Augustine grass and you didn't get your pre-emergence down, or you're new to the home and the previous owner did not use pre-emergence to control the weeds, if you have weeds in your St. Augustine grass, I beg of you, do not use 2,4-D on this turf. We can use 2,4-D on Bermuda, we can use 2,4-D on zoysia grass, and if you're familiar with those turfs and you've worked on those turfs, that's probably your go-to for any broadleaf weed. If you've got clovers, you're using 2,4-D. If you have henbent, you're using 2,4-D. The list goes on. 2,4-D will kill St. Augustine. Most of the time, it'll stun it back really, really hard. It'll be brown for several weeks and it'll slowly come back, but sometimes you can completely kill it. So what should you use? There's a product called Celsius that is safe for using on St. Augustine. Also, Image makes a product. Image is safe for St. Augustine, certain types of Image. Look at your labels on the Image products. If you go to the big box stores, they have Image products. There'll be one that says Image for St. Augustine and centipede grass. Use that one on your St. Augustine turf for your broadleaf weeds. Do not use 2,4-D. Guys, as always, thank you for watching The Plant Doctor. And until next time, happy gardening.